If you only see one sci-fi action movie exploring the madness of the multiverse this month, why not make it everything, everywhere, all at once? Move over, Doctor Strange. Michelle Yeoh will see us now. The new creation by cult filmmakers Daniels, they made the movie where Harry Potter plays a friendly talking corpse, and they are making some serious waves in our dimension, despite heavyweight competition from Marvel. And so we thought that it would be cool to take a deep dive into this weird and wonderful adventure. And trust us, production was as wacky as the finished product. Last decade was the decade of the shared universe, and what logically comes next? The shared multiverse, obviously. The concept is having a bit of a moment right now, but the writer-directors of Everything, Everywhere, All at Once have been planning their take for longer than you might think. In fact, Daniel Scheinert and Daniel Kwan started researching the multiverse way back in the dim and distant past of 2010. They were inspired by the 1986 movie Sherman's March, and were excited to explore the idea in a picture of their own. However, there were some bumps along the way, not least the release of TV show Rick and Morty and movies like Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, both of which also tackled parallel dimensions. These big releases were kind of disappointing for Daniels because they thought that they had been beaten to the punch, but we think that you'll agree that their take is unique enough to stand out from the competition, and that take has certainly evolved over the years. Not even the casting was set in stone.
What's happening?
Originally, Daniels wanted another martial arts movie legend to take on the lead role, a certain Mr. Jackie Chan. Okay, yeah, we can picture that. They even wrote a draft of the script with Chan in mind before eventually deciding that they felt the husband-wife dynamic of the movie would be better served by having a female protagonist. But of course, they still wanted someone who could pull off all the wild stunts that they had in mind, and who better than Michelle Yeoh? They even initially named her character Michelle, though the actress supported changing the name to Evelyn, as she wanted more distance between herself and the character. Of course, Yeoh may be the most important special effect in the movie, but she's not the only one. The visual effects in Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness were provided by 10 different FX houses made up of hundreds of artists. The visual effects in Everywhere, Everything, All at Once were provided by a single team comprised of 5 people, none of whom went to school to learn how to do visual effects. Pretty impressive, no? Okay, so it's not necessarily that illuminating to compare a comparatively low-budget independent movie with the Marvel juggernaut. They are working at different scales, after all, but it just goes to show you how much you can pull off with a small team that knows what they're doing, as we'll see in a second. Led by Zach Stoltz, who has been in the industry for several years but had never worked as a visual effects supervisor on a movie before this one, the 5-person team provided approximately 500 VFX shots for Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. Oh, and we should probably mention that they did the majority of this work in their bedrooms during the pandemic. Don't you just love a DIY ethic? The filmmakers are on record as saying that they did not want to flood the movie with CGI.
We wanted to celebrate the magic of just like editing, of a jump cut, of something popping and being something different.
In fact, a lot of the tricks and the hacks employed by the filmmakers were surprisingly lo-fi, considering how slick the whole thing looks. For example, for the instantly iconic scenes where Evelyn is blasted through the multiverse, flying backwards past flashing cityscapes, Daniel Kwan shot a bunch of stock footage by just wandering around New York with a pocket camera. This footage, which he made as blurry as possible, was then cut roughly together so that he and his fellow Daniel could help Michelle Yeoh to plan her performance. Once they had worked out how Yeoh was going to move, they positioned her in front of cheap LED panels, sending the video footage through the panels so that Yeoh could act in front of the visuals. Then it was over to the VFX guys to add streaks, motion lines, and other dynamic flourishes. For big blockbusters, more often than not, the stars don't do many of their own stunts, if they do any at all. Unless, of course, you're a Keanu Reeves or Tom Cruise or someone like that. The actor might not even be on set for them. And in some cases, filmmakers didn't even bother with practical stunts at all. They just take care of everything with pre-vis and post-production. Not Daniels, and not Michelle Yeoh. When Evelyn shoots backwards in her office chair for the first big interdimensional trip, that shot was done entirely practically on set. They opened the camera shutter in order to achieve the visual streaks and then pushed her slowly through the office in slow motion, using a leaf blower to send her hair flying out behind her to simulate the velocity of the movement. Then they simply sped up the footage in post. Everything, Everywhere, All at Once marks the big screen return of someone we all remember fondly from our childhoods. It's actor Kwan, who had memorable roles as a child star in the 1980s in the likes of Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom and the Goonies. Sadly, Hollywood is a fickle business, and Kwan found that acting opportunities were drying up in the late 90s. Not to be defeated, he shifted gears and became a stunt coordinator and assistant director instead. Now, he's back in front of the camera for his first major acting role in 20 years. Hold on to your potatoes, Dr. Jones! If you've seen the movie, you'll know that it's packing some memorably weird imagery. From the dimension populated by rocks with googly eyes to the dimension where people have weird hot dog fingers that squirt condiments. What you may not know is that those hot dog fingers were not CGI. They were real prosthetics. They're effectively just big gloves based on molds taken from the actress's real fingers, coated with realistic skin and hair. Oh, and did we mention that the hot dog fingers squirt condiments? Yeah. The multiverse may be the flavor of the month right now, but not everybody who has tackled the concept has seemed interested in exploiting it to its full potential. Luckily, Daniel set out to explore the thematic and personal ramifications of interdimensional travel, as well as the weird and wacky visuals, making Everything All at Once a character drama as much as a sci-fi brain twister. It's all about showing the glorious variety of the multiverse and the different paths that Evelyn's life could potentially have taken. For instance, in one dimension, Evelyn is a huge international movie star, a version of the character clearly modeled on Michelle Yeoh herself. So it's pretty cool that, for that sequence, the filmmakers took full advantage of those similarities, actually reusing red carpet footage from the star's real-life career. I mean, hey, if you've got the material, why not make good use of it, right? In keeping with the sweeping cosmic vibe of the movie, the soundtrack was composed by experimental American band Sun Lux, who really went to town capturing the madness of the multiverse. The album has nearly 50 tracks, and the band were encouraged to experiment, inspiring them to make use of instruments that they had never really even played before. And I think it's fitting that for this extremely eclectic movie, Sun Lux tapped an equally eclectic set of collaborators. Seriously, what other movie soundtrack features Mitski, Randy Newman, David Byrne from Talking Heads, and Andre 3000 from Outkast playing his own custom-made flute? Every instrument, everywhere, all at once, you could say, if you wanted. Part of the mission statement for Everything, Everywhere, All at Once was to make a family drama that gets interrupted by a sci-fi movie. And one of the key scenes to show that transition is the scene where Deidre, played by Jamie Lee Curtis, audits Michelle Yeoh's Evelyn. This scene, which is one of the first moments in the movie where things start getting kind of weird, was also one of the first scenes that editor Paul Rogers cut together. Both Rogers and the directors recognized what a pivotal scene it was to help everybody acclimatize to the shifting moods of the movie, so once they'd assembled the first rough cut, they showed it to the rest of the actors and the production crew in order to give everybody a better idea of exactly what movie they were making. The power of editing, my friends, and while we are on that subject, we're all used to sitting in the movie theater for 2.5 hours, 3 hours, or even more these days, but just because we're used to it doesn't mean all movies justify those extended lengths, and brevity is the soul of wit, as some English guy once said, we think. Case in point, the first cut of Everything Everywhere All at Once was almost 3 hours long, and while there was plenty of great stuff in there, the filmmaker said that once they had that first edit, they were pretty ruthless about cutting it down. Even if a scene was good, if they felt that it didn't service the film, then chop, it was gone. Movie productions are always full of intriguing roads not taken, and casting is one of the most interesting areas. In some dimension, somewhere across the universe, for example, Awkwafina played the character of Joy in Everything Everywhere All at Once. The star of Shang-Chi, Nora from Queens and Crazy Rich Asians, was originally lined up to feature as Joy in our universe, but she had to drop out due to scheduling conflicts, leading Stephanie Hsu to take on the role. And we think you'll agree, Hsu was a worthy replacement. In another neat bit of multiversal serendipity, Daniels actually once directed an episode of Nora from Queens featuring, wait for it, Stephanie Hsu. See, it's all connected. Daniels direct as a duo, and it sounds like that was not just useful for them, but also for the rest of the cast and the crew. each Daniel has different specialty areas. So, if the actors wanted tips on performance, they could go to Daniel Scheinert, because he used to be an actor himself. But for tips on physical comedy, they would go to Daniel Kwan, who's an expert in that area. Teamwork making the dream work. See what's not to like there. Oh, and as a bonus, both Daniels have small cameos in the movie. Did you spot them? Let us know in the comments. Naturally, if you are going to make a movie where Michelle Yeoh travels between universes, it stands to reason that you're gonna have a few fight scenes. And Daniels wanted to make sure that their martial arts beatdowns were worthy of their star and of the history of big screen brawls. To that end, they brought on Andy Lee as chief fight choreographer. Not only has Lee previously worked on huge movies like Shang-Chi and The Legend of the Ten Rings, but he also runs the Martial Club YouTube channel with his brothers. When asked how it felt to be fighting Michelle Yeoh on screen, Andy said that he was living the dream, and who can blame him? Not only was it important for Daniels that their choreography be slick, but they also wanted to make each fight scene inventive, incorporating the kind of inventive slapstick that you would find in the movies of Jackie Chan. Exhibit A, the now infamous fanny pack fight scene, in which Kwan absolutely destroys a bunch of security guards with, yes, a fanny pack. Why that particular accessory? Well, Daniel Kwan said that the fanny pack is integral to the stereotypical image of Asian dad tourists, something that he remembers from his childhood that can often be a source of embarrassment. So he thought, why not take that singularly lame item and turn it into something bad, eh? The results, we think you'll agree, speak for themselves. That is one Asian dad tourist we absolutely would not want to mess with. You can see from scenes like the fanny pack fight scene that everything, everywhere, all at once fits into a long lineage of wild and intricately choreographed action movies. And the Daniels have named a bunch of the cinematic inspirations that they drew upon when making their epic. These included classic Wu-Tang films, Japanese samurai movies, Enter the Dragon, The Matrix, and Kill Bill. And perhaps more surprisingly, It's a Wonderful Life. Oh, and of course, there's the movie that kicked off their multiverse obsession, Sherman's March. Or to give it its full title, Sherman's March, a meditation on the possibility of romantic love in the South during an era of nuclear weapons proliferation. For connoisseurs of long movie titles.
Boy, that escalated quickly.
That's a full 7 words longer than Doctor Strangelove or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb. Part of the magic, and we imagine the headache, of lower budget indie filmmaking is that sometimes you need to find clever workarounds. Maybe that's for budgetary reasons, or maybe, as with everything everywhere all at once, it's because your shooting schedule was suddenly interrupted by a global pandemic. Or maybe both. Remember this scene where Evelyn is talking to her husband in the van, then Deidre's hand suddenly slams against the window? Well, when they needed to shoot this scene, Michelle Yeoh was in Paris, Kwan was in LA, and Jamie Lee Curtis wasn't there at all. Instead, they composited separate footage of Yeoh and Kwan, and one of the Daniels hit the window with his own hand, just wearing Deidre's outfit. Sometimes you just gotta improvise. And much like the audit scene, that scene in the van was another example of what the Daniels called a training wheel scene. What they meant by that was a sequence where the comparatively realistic family drama of the first act started to bleed into the crazy, multiversal wackiness of the rest of the story. In effect, it's a scene that teaches the audience how to watch the movie, getting them ready for when things get really, really wild. It's a clever approach, and one that could hopefully be the difference between an impenetrable, bizarre cult movie and one with wider commercial reach. Of course, a movie like Everything Everywhere All at Once is only ever going to be, let's say, somewhat accessible to mainstream audiences. Exhibit A, the aforementioned hot dog fingers that squirt condiments. And Exhibit B, the universe where Evelyn and Joy are rocks with googly eyes rather than people. It's actually a fantastic scene. And interestingly, there was originally a bunch of dialogue. However, Michelle Yeoh suggested that it be inaudible, which we think definitely adds to the weird poetry of the scene. That rock sequence was partly inspired by a children's book called Sylvester and the Magic Pebble, and a game called Everything, where you can play as, well, everything. Man, this movie really is a melting pot of influences. Lots of movies have different working titles, sometimes for publicity reasons to keep filming under wraps, sometimes just because the filmmakers have not settled on a title that they like yet. For example, you probably know that Return of the Jedi was shot under the fake title Blue Harvest, but you may not know that Deadpool was shot under the name Wham, because it's his favorite band, naturally. Or did you know this one? The Last Jedi was shot under the name Space Bear? Yeah, you knew that one. As for Everything Everywhere All at Once, its working title was the slightly less exciting but still kinda charming, A Woman Tries to Do Her Taxes. No, seriously. We actually think that would've looked pretty funny on a poster. This year we've had Benedict Cumberbatches from different universes meeting themselves, multiple Nicolas Cages, and now multiple Michelle Yeohs? Okay, so what's next? Who do we want to see coming face to face with their multiversal counterparts? I like the idea of a Crisis on Infinite Samuel L. Jackson's, just throwing that out there.